This season of Myth Madness is on Persian mythology. The best source for Persian mythology is an epic poem composed in 1010 AD called the Shahnameh, or Book of Kings. This poem covers multiple generations of legendary Persian kings and tells the stories about their lives and exploits, as well as a whole cast of heroic warriors who support them. The Shahnameh provided the backbone for this season of the pod, and along the way I brought in material from other epic poems and ancient Persian texts to make comparisons and provide more details. Towards the beginning of the season, I focused more on the Persian kings, but the last few episodes, I introduced a young hero named Rostam. Rostam is the greatest of the Persian heroes, and the Shahnameh itself also switches to focus more on his exploits. Last episode, Rostam helped out the Persian king Kay Kavus, or Kay Kavus. In this episode, he's going to come to the rescue of the next king, Kay Kavus, or Kay Kavus. In doing so, Rostam will need to overcome a series of trials. These trials are often compared to the Greek hero Heracles' labors, and Rostam himself is often described as an Iranian Heracles. Rostam's strength, difficult birth, and some of his adventures do evoke Heracles, but this is really a superficial comparison. Rostam has flaws, but he is more of an ideal hero when compared to Heracles. He has very little of the rage that gets the Greek hero into so much trouble. Their trials or labors are quite different, and the reason they complete them is also quite different. Additionally, Heracles' labors are distinct, each being almost a separate adventure. Whereas the trials Rostam will complete in this episode are really all steps in the same adventure. He also does not even complete the first couple himself, as you'll hear. Okay, with that out of the way, let's start. Last episode, I ended with Kay Kavus ascending the throne of Iran. He had a promising start, but with a little help from the evil spirit Ahriman, who is back, it soon became apparent that Kay Kavus was a complete and utter fool. As the Shahnameh says, one day, Kay Kavus sat on his throne in his garden drinking wine. A div, possibly Ahriman himself, disguised as a musician, came into the garden and wished to sing to the Persian king. The musician sang about his homeland, Mazandaran, with its gardens that bloomed all year long, its high mountain slopes, how it was springtime all year, and how its people were more beautiful than any others in the whole world. The div's song enchanted the king, filling his mind with all sorts of absurd notions. In that moment, he decided it would be a great idea to march his army out of Persia and conquer the musician's homeland. Kay Kavus told his warriors that his kingship was greater than Jamshid's and Zahak's. He was more just than them and should rule the whole world like they had. When the warriors heard this, they were not impressed. They were disturbed by Kay Kavus' arrogance, and none of them had any interest in battling against divs, but they said nothing and kept silent. Afterwards, they held a council, and worried amongst themselves that if the king didn't forget what he had said while he was drinking, the land would face disaster. No one had ever planned to attack the div homeland Mazandaran before, not Jamshid and not Feridun. They decided they needed to send a message to Zal, begging him to come at once, and to convince the king that the evil spirit Ahriman had put this dangerous idea into his mind. When Zal heard the news, he was alarmed. He was deeply troubled that the royal tree's leaves had already turned yellow. He set out at once, and when the heroes Tus, Gudars, Giv, Bahram, Gorgon, and Roham heard he was approaching, they went out and greeted him. They told him they should go to court and give their advice to the king together. When they arrived, the king greeted them. Zal told the king that Mazandaran was full of lies, spells, and sorcery. Attacking the place would only throw away gold and men. No one had ever conquered Mazandaran before, not through a direct invasion or by stealth. But Kay Kavus would not listen. He told Zal that he did not need his opinion. He told the warriors that he was greater than Jamshid, had a larger army than Manachir, and neither of them had ever considered attacking Mazandaran. He declared he would tell his div enemies to submit, or be forced to submit. he would clear the Div country of sorcerers and soldiers. Zal saw that the king's mind was made up, and that no sense could be talked into him. He said goodbye, and left the king with his mind filled with anxiety. The other heroes thanked Zal for coming, and hoped that the Creator would guide Kavus so he did not make this great mistake. After Zal left, Kay Kavus ordered Tus and Gudars to assemble the army. Kavus would lead the invasion himself. He entrusted the throne to a warrior named Mylad while he was away. Kavus told Mylad that if he ran into trouble, he should seek help from Zal and Rostam. And with that, the Persian army departed, led by Kay Kavus, Tus, Gudars, and Gudars' son Giv. Eventually, they crossed the border and came to one of Mazandaran's cities. Kavus ordered his army to kill anyone they saw, to burn any building they found, so that the Divs of Mazandaran would submit to Kavus' might. While the Persians were busy looting, news of the invasion reached the Div king of Mazandaran. He needed help, and he told one of his courtiers, a Div named Sanjay, to ask help from the powerful White Div. The White Div promised to bring an army and drive the Persians away. The White Div was a demonic sorcerer, and that night he worked his magic to create a dark black cloud that descended over Kay Kavus' army. It was as if the air had filled with smoke, and the Persian warriors stumbled through the darkness on their way to their tents to sleep the night. But in the morning, when the warriors awoke, they were completely blind. Chaos ensued, and many of them died. This panic continued on for a full 7 days. On the 8th day, the voice of the White Div filled the air. He berated Kay Kavus for foolishly thinking he could conquer Mazandaran. Then he sent his own army of 12,000 demons to round up the surviving Persians and imprison them. Fortunately for Kay Kavus, one of the Persian warriors managed to escape, and somehow quickly made his way to Zal. He told Zal that the evil spirit Ahriman had manipulated the king, and how Kay Kavus and many Persian warriors, including some of its best heroes, were now blind and held captive. Zal knew this was a very dangerous turn of events for Persia. If the king was not rescued, the whole country could fall apart. Foreign enemies could descend on the kingdom, tearing it apart like wolves with a sheep's corpse. Zal summoned Rostam. He told him he should immediately saddle his horse, Raksh, and ride deep into Mazandaran. The king of Mazandaran, his general Arzang, and the White Div must be defeated. Kay Kavus must be rescued. Zal told Rostam there were 2 ways into Mazandaran. The first way was the route Kay Kavus had taken, probably not a good idea. The second way was through the mountains, and would confront Rostam with many monstrous things. But it would be unexpected, and thus a better way for the hero to go. Rostam accepted the quest, and the following morning happily rode out of Sistan. He rode by day and all through the night, hoping to get to his destination faster. But soon, Rostam grew tired and hungry. When he came to a meadow filled with a herd of wild donkeys, Rostam captured one of them. He killed it and skinned it and roasted it over a roaring fire. When he was finished eating, Rostam took the reins off Raksh, rubbed down his horse, and let him graze in the meadow. Rostam made a bed from some reeds and went to sleep. What he didn't know was that the reeds also hid the lair of a ferocious man-eating lion. In the middle of the night, the lion came back to its lair to find Rostam asleep and Raksh tied up nearby. The lion moved to kill Raksh first, but the horse reared up on its hind legs, brought his front hooves down on the lion's head. The horse bit and tore the lion to pieces. All the commotion woke up Rostam. He saw what his horse had done and was amazed. He rubbed Raksh down and told him, "Who told you to fight lions? Wake me up next time. I will handle the lion." In the morning, Rostam saddled Raksh and continued down the mountain road away from the site of their first trial. Time went by and both horse and rider became thirsty. They staggered around looking for water, when finally Rostam spied a fat ram frolicking in the brush nearby. Rostam figured that if a ram lived here, a spring could not be that far away. So Rostam led Raksh by the reins and followed the ram to a freshwater stream. Rostam drank until he was full, washed his horse in the water, hunted another wild donkey, and then cooked it over another fire. When it was time to sleep, Rostam patted his horse's head and said, "Don't fight anyone tonight. If a div or lion appears, wake me up." That night, a monstrous dragon saw Rostam asleep and Raksh grazing nearby, and decided to eat them. Raksh saw the dragon and quickly nudged Rostam awake. When Rostam looked around ready to fight, the dragon was nowhere to be seen, hidden in the darkness outside the camp. Rostam lectured his horse about waking him up unnecessarily, and then went back to sleep. The dragon returned, and Raksh stamped on the ground, waking Rostam again. Rostam didn't see the dragon this time either. Now frustrated, Rostam told his horse to go to sleep, and if he woke up the warrior again, Rostam would cut off his hooves. Then Rostam fell back asleep. Soon, the dragon came back yet again. This time, afraid of both Rostam and the dragon, Raksh galloped away. But then, fearing what would happen to his master, the horse turned around and came back, pawing the ground loudly. This time, Rostam woke up and saw the dragon. He drew his sword as the dragon attacked. When Raksh saw the dragon and Rostam fighting, the horse also charged forward. It bit the dragon's shoulders with such ferocity that even Rostam was surprised. Then, with the dragon distracted, Rostam cut off its head. After that, Rostam mounted his trusty steed once again and continued on his path through the land of demons and sorcerers. Rostam and Raksh traveled the whole day. They left the mountain wasteland behind them and rode through a beautiful landscape full of lush trees and trickling streams. As evening arrived, they found a long table sitting next to a river. On the table was a gold goblet filled with wine, plates of roasted chicken and freshly baked bread, salted meats, and bowls of candied fruit. But the chairs were all empty. No one was around. The feast belonged to a group of sorcerers who had disappeared when they heard Raksh's hooves thundering up the road. Rostam decided to help himself to the abandoned food. He sat down and ate some of the chicken. He drank some of the wine. He found a lute on the table, picked it up and began to play it, singing a song about himself. His song was overheard by one of the sorcerers hiding nearby. The witch disguised herself as a beautiful young girl. She came out of the forest and sat down next to Rostam. The hero did not realize she was a div in disguise. He handed her a bowl of wine and praised the creator for giving good things. But as soon as he uttered the creator's name, the witch's magic spell ended, and her real form appeared. Rostam jumped up and quickly tied her up with his lasso. He cut the witch in two with his dagger, and then continued on his journey. Rostam and Raksh rode on. The air grew black and hot, and soon Rostam's clothes were soaked with sweat. Two of them needed sleep. They came to a meadow where Rostam took off Raksh's saddle and lay down in the grass to sleep. The meadow was actually a wheat field, and the div who had been tasked with keeping animals out of it saw Raksh and ran towards him. He saw Rostam and began to hit his legs with a stick, trying to wake him up and get him out of the wheat field. When Rostam awoke, the man yelled at him and accused him of spoiling the property of the owner of the field. This only angered Rostam. He jumped up, grabbed the div by the ears, and tore them off of his head. The div fell to the ground screaming, and then picked up his ears and ran away. The owner of the field was named Olad, and the earless man ran to him. He told Olad that he went to get a horse out of the wheat and found that it belonged to a terrible evil human, who jumped up and without saying anything, ripped off his ears. Olad was with a group of div noblemen, and they were in the middle of hunting a lion that lived nearby, but he was so astonished to hear the tale from his servant that he had him show where Rostam was located. When Rostam saw them approaching, he mounted his horse, drew his sword, and rode toward them like a threatening thundercloud. Olad called out and asked him who he was, but Rostam only replied that he was a cloud that would rain down spears and swords. Then the Persian attacked, and soon the meadow was filled with the heads and severed limbs of div horsemen. Day turned to night, and Rostam caught Olad. He tied Olad up with his lasso, bound his arms, flung him over his horse, and told Olad to tell Rostam where the white div lived and where Kay Kavus was imprisoned. If he did this and told the truth, Rostam would take his mace, defeat the king of Mazandaran, and place Olad on the throne in his place. Olad told Rostam that if he spared him, he would tell him what he wanted to know. He would show him where the white div lived and where the king of Persia was imprisoned. Olad said that where they now stood to the place where the Persian king was held was 100 parsangs, and from there to where the div was, it was another 100 parsangs. The land they would pass through was roamed by 600,000 horsemen, 1,200 elephants. Rostam would find a great cavern between two mountains. There lived 12,000 demons commanded by their leader and the White Div, and from there was another difficult journey to where the king of Mazandaran lived. Rostam would not be able to survive in that land by himself. From Olad's lands, Rostam rode to Mount Aspruz, which was the place that Kay Kavus had been defeated by the White Div's magic. By this time, the bright day had turned to a dark night, and Rostam could see a plain full of fires and candles, with strange shrieks and noises heard on the wind. Rostam asked Olad what this place was, what the lights were, what the sound was. Olad simply told him this was the heartland of Mazandaran. The inhabitants here barely slept. The lights below were their campfires, and Div warriors were making the wild sounds that Rostam could hear. Rostam decided not to descend into the plain below. He made camp and spent the night, thinking about the demons in the countryside below. In the morning, Rostam tied Olad to a tree with his lasso. The hero left the Div nobleman behind and rode deeper into Mazandaran, his mind thinking about how he could possibly succeed in his quest. Eventually, he reached an army of demons led by the Div general Arzang. Rostam gave a big shout. The Div general heard it and came rushing out of his tent. Rostam galloped towards him, grabbed Arzang by the ears, and tore them from his head. He flung the ears into the crowd of Div warriors, blood dripping on their faces as the ears sailed through the air. The Divs were terrified. They ran away from the wrath of Rostam, stumbling over each other in their haste to get away. Rostam slaughtered many of them, but others escaped. By the end of the day, he made it back to where he started. With the large demon army, led by Arzang, now out of the way, Rostam freed Olad from his bonds and asked him to lead the way to where Kay Kavus was imprisoned. He followed Olad, and when they finally did arrive at a city, Rosh the horse was so pleased to get out of the wasteland, he made a loud neigh. The king of Persia was nearby, and heard the horse's neigh. He was so overjoyed to know that Rostam had come to rescue him. When Rostam found them, the Persians gathered around him and blessed his arrival. They questioned him about the perils he had faced on his journey. The king embraced him and asked about his father Zal. He told Rostam to head to the White Div's lair immediately, while he still had the benefit of surprise. The king told Rostam the only way the Persian's blindness could be cured was with a potion made from the blood and brains of the White Div. Rostam dutifully prepared to leave. He told the Persian captives they should remain in the Div city until he returned. Rostam and Olad stealthily made their way through the rest of Mazandaran and finally arrived at the Seven Mountains, where the White Div's lair was located. They found the entrance to a deep cavern, and the hero prepared for the coming fight. Rostam turned to Olad and told him that he had been honest so far, but that now was the time of the true battle, and Olad needed to tell him how to proceed. Olad said Rostam should wait for the heat of the afternoon, when the demons went inside to sleep. So Rostam waited until the sun was high in the sky, and then he tied up all the coils of his lasso, mounted his horse, drew his sword, and yelled his name in a loud battle cry. He rode through the 7 mountains, charging the Divs and cutting off their heads. He rode into the dark pit of the cavern, but with its shadows, the White Div was invisible. Rostam squinted his eyes, finally making out a mountain of a creature hiding in the gloom. Its hair was white like snow, and it was wearing iron armor. Rostam was actually scared. He wondered if this fight would be the feat that finally destroyed him. But he bravely sprang forward, slashing his sword and striking a blow against the creature and cutting off one of its legs. But the wound did not stop the White Div. The two locked together in combat, tearing flesh from each other's bodies, turning the mud at the bottom of the cavern red with their blood. Finally, Rostam grabbed the demon by the neck and threw him to the ground. He plunged his dagger into its chest and hacked out the White Div's heart and liver. Rostam walked out of the cavern. He handed the White Div's liver to Olad, and the two of them returned to the Persian king. Olad complimented Rostam. The Persian was a lion in war. The Div nobleman asked the hero to remember the reward that he had promised him. Rostam told him, "Don't worry. I will bestow Mazandaran on you, and you will rule it from border to border. But this adventure is not over, and there are long, difficult days ahead. When the king of Mazandaran is finally defeated, and his warriors have had their heads cut off, then I will make you ruler and fulfill my promise." When they returned to where Kay Kavus and the Persians were imprisoned, Rostam brushed the king's eyes with 3 drops of the white Diev's blood. The darkness cleared, and the king could see again. The Persians celebrated with a week of wine and music, seemingly forgetting that they were still deep in enemy territory. Then the king and his chieftains mounted their horses, grabbed their lances, and were ready to resume the invasion of Mazandaran. They brought fire and sword to the various demon cities scattered around the landscape. Finally, Kavus stopped his men. He told them the time of punishment was over, and that they should send a smart, dignified diplomat to go and speak to the demon king. So Kavus wrote a letter to the king of Mazandaran. He said the king should accept Kavus as overlord and pay him taxes. If the demon king did not agree, Kavus would send Rostam to make war on him, and what happened to Arzang and the White Diev would happen to him too. Kavus gave the letter to a warrior named Farhad. Farhad took the letter and rode all the way to the land of Gorg Saran, where the king of Mazandaran had his palace. When the king of Mazandaran heard that Kavus's messenger was approaching, he told his warriors not to welcome him. He told them to act like leopards, to insult and provoke him, such that even the most patient of men would fight back. The Dievs went out, and when Farhad arrived, their faces creased with frowns instead of polite smiles. One of them held out his hand for Farhad to shake. When Farhad took his hand, the Diev gave it a bone-crushing squeeze, but Farhad didn't even flinch. They escorted the Persian to the king, who questioned him on his journey before receiving Kavus's letter. The king of Mazandaran was greatly saddened to hear of the deaths of Arzang and the White Diev. He wept tears. He told Farhad that Kavus did not threaten him, and that he would raise an army of thousands of Dievs to attack the Persians like savage lions. When Farhad heard this, he didn't even wait for it to be written down. He got back on his horse and returned to the Persian king. When the Persians heard what had happened, Rostam told Kavus he would deal with the king of Mazandaran. He told Kavus to write another letter, and this time Rostam would deliver it. Kay Kavus's second letter doubled down on his demand for surrender. Rostam took the letter and then saddled Raksh and galloped to the king of Mazandaran's palace. The king of Mazandaran heard of another Persian messenger's approach and sent out his warriors to meet him again. When Rostam saw them coming down the road, he stopped his horse, pulled a tree out of the ground, and waved it around in the air like a lance. The Dievs were amazed, and Rostam tossed the tree down before joining them. One of the Dievs held out his hand to shake. When he held Rostam's hand and squeezed it, Rostam only smiled. When Rostam shook the Diev's hand back, he also gave it a squeeze. The Diev turned white in pain and then collapsed to the ground. When he came to, he galloped back to his king and told him what had happened. Next, the king of Mazandaran summoned a strong warrior named Kolavar. He ordered him to go face the mysterious messenger. Kolavar rode out and repeated the handshakes with Rostam. When Kolavar squeezed Rostam's hand, the Persian did not react. But when Rostam squeezed Kolavar's hand, the Diev's fingernails dropped off and his whole arm became useless. He rode back to the king and showed him his withered arm. He told the king it would be better if he surrendered. His army had no hope standing against a man like the mysterious Persian. At that point, Rostam finally arrived. The king of Mazandaran was suspicious. He sat the messenger down and asked if he was really the famous Rostam. Rostam hid his true identity. He told the king he was not even worthy to be Rostam's servant. Rostam was a far stronger warrior and a far more skilled horseman. The king of Mazandaran was now worried. What fearsome people these Persians were. But when the king read Kay Kavus's letter, he became very angry. He told Rostam to turn around and leave. He would not surrender to an arrogant fool like Kay Kavus. When Rostam left, the king of Mazandaran assembled his armies and marched to the border with Iran. Kay Kavus had his own noble warriors. Rostam, Tus, Gudars, and Giv prepared their own armies and rushed to the border to intercept. Before the battle began, a Diev named Juhan walked out to the space between the two armies and challenged one of the Persians to a duel. Rostam rode up to meet his challenge, after the other warriors remained silent. Rostam pierced Juhan with a lance, spitting him like a roasted chicken. He threw the dead Diev to the ground. The warriors of Mazandaran became fearful, but their king ordered them to charge forward. The air became filled with the sound of drums and the clash of weapons. Swords and maces flashed, and soon the ground became slick with blood. The battle lasted an entire week. On the 8th day, Kay Kavus was saddened by the unending bloodshed and prayed to the Creator for victory. He put on his own helmet and ordered his warriors to charge forward once again. During the charge, Rostam rode straight at the king of Mazandaran. He threw a lance at his enemy, but at the last moment the king worked his magic and turned himself into a large mountainous rock. The Persian warriors took turns trying to lift the large granite rock. Finally, Rostam lifted it up, carried it to Kay Kavus's tent, and flung it to the ground. He addressed the rock and told the king of Mazandaran to turn back, or Rostam would use a crowbar to turn the rock to gravel. The king of Mazandaran heard this, and transformed into a cloudy shape wearing a helmet and armor. Rostam dragged him in front of Kay Kavus, and Kay Kavus ordered his executioner to hack the man to pieces, and that was the end of the king of Mazandaran. The Persians then went to the enemy camp and gathered up the coins, weapons, armor, and treasures the Deevs had abandoned there. Kay Kavus distributed out to his troops and ordered that the demons who had not yet surrendered be decapitated, and that their bodies be left on the side of the highway. The Persians held a great feast to celebrate their victory over Mazandaran. During the music and wine, Rostam went to Kay Kavus and told him that Olad had been his guide on the long journey, acted honestly, and Rostam had promised him the throne of Mazandaran. Kay Kavus agreed, and Olad was made the new king. Then the Persian army departed Mazandaran. Rostam returned to Sistan, and Kay Kavus returned to Persia, no longer blind, and with the hands of the evil spirit Ahriman tied. So that's the story of Rostam's adventures in Mazandaran, the homeland of the Deevs. In past episodes, I've supplemented the Shah-Name's stories with information from older Zoroastrian religious texts. The idea there was to show how some characters in Persian mythology changed over time. But for Rostam, this is impossible. Unlike many of the Persian kings, Rostam is not mentioned in the older Zoroastrian literature, only the later epic poems and histories. However, his adventures in Mazandaran may have an earlier analogue, just with a different hero performing them. The Bundahishni and Denkard, two collections of Zoroastrian materials composed centuries before the Shah-Name, tell how the kings Feridun and Kay-Us waged wars against Mazandars, a foreign tribe of monstrous people. These foreigners invaded Iran after Feridun's defeat of Zahak, and Feridun defeated them in battle at a large field called Peshanseh. Afterwards, some of the defeated Mazandars were turned into stones. The similarity in names and the turning of some of the enemies into stone is interesting. Maybe stories of Rostam's adventures were layered over top the earlier tales of Feridun's war to eventually get the version presented in the Shah-Name. Food for thought. And that's all for this episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend. You can also provide a review of the pod on your preferred podcast streaming platform. Thank you for listening.